A very good evening to one and all. I welcome you all to this news analysis initiative. These are the articles that are important from today's newspaper. Before we move to the first article, let me make one thing very clear. When you read news like Venezuela's president captured in a nighttime US military operation, do not get carried away by operational details, speculation, or dramatic narratives. From a civil services examination point of view, that is not where marks are. Your job is to extract geopolitically relevant takeaways and move on. Now, how do we look at this issue for UPSC? First, locate the country. Venezuela is in northern South America with a long Caribbean Sea coastline. This immediately places it in the US strategic neighborhood, unlike conflicts far away in Eurasia. Second, strategic geography. Remember Lake Maracaibo. This region is crucial because it is one of the world's oldest and richest oil producing zones. So it anchors Venezuela's energy geopolitics. Any instability here has implications for global oil supply and prices. Third, why the US is involved. Look into the big picture, not the tactics. Next, fourth one, what themes you should extract for answers. And finally, exam utility. This issue is not for factual narration. It is useful as a GS2 international relations example, GS3 energy security linkage, and as an essay illustration on power politics and interventionism. That's it. Move on to the next article. Don't focus on this narratives given or said in the news and don't get carried away, don't get distracted. This is what I wanted to convey to you. Center will allow multiple airports in major cities, says Civil Aviation Minister. Here, first you should know that India is witnessing rapid growth in air passenger traffic, leading to congestion and saturation at existing airports. To address this, the Union government is reconsidering long-standing aviation policy constraints. See, if you look into the aviation policy, we have National Civil Aviation Policy 2016. Now, the current policy says no airports within 150 kilometer. But now the proposed shift is this policy is under review. So initially it was like single airport per major city. Now they are relooking into multiple airports. And the cities identified for multiple or new airports are Mumbai, Ghaziabad, Bengaluru, Chennai, and other major cities with rising passenger traffic. So, this policy shift aims to manage surging passenger traffic, reduce congestion at metro airports, promote economic activity, direct and indirect employment, regional development. And this will also boost allied sectors like maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities, and road and surface connectivity. The next photo shot is this injured tiger. See, this is taken from the Taraihalla Reserve Forest at Porthi near Udagamandalam. It is in Tamil Nadu. Just look into this place. This is important for us. The next article for the day is India's Russian oil imports at 6-month high in November. India's crude oil import pattern in November 2025 reflects a complex balancing act between energy security, geopolitical pressures, and trade negotiations, particularly with the United States and Russia. Together, Russia and the US accounted for nearly 50% of India's total oil imports in November 2025. If you take Russia, Russian crude imports rose to a 6-month high in both volume and value. Imports were nearly 7% higher than November 2024 and the highest since May 2025. In value terms, Russian oil constituted 34% of India's total oil import bill. So, this reinforces Russia's position as India's largest crude supplier, reflecting India's continued reliance on discounted Russian oil amid global price volatility. The next is the US oil imports. Now, India significantly increased crude purchases from the United States. US oil imports reached a 7-month high of nearly 2.8 million tons, raising the US share in India's oil imports to 12.6% compared to 4.2% in the previous month. Now, this indicates India's attempt to balance US strategic concerns and signal goodwill despite unresolved trade tensions. The next article for the day, from a hopeless end to endless hope. So, India has committed to ending child marriage by 2030 under the Sustainable Development Goals. And despite a decline at the national level, child marriage remains a serious challenge in several states. West Bengal, particularly Murshidabad district, records among the highest incidences of child marriage in India. See, Murshidabad is one of the economically poorer districts of West Bengal, and seasonal male migration and home based work such as beedi rolling by women shape local livelihoods. According to the NFHS 5 survey, 55.4% of women aged 20 to 24 years in Murshidabad were married before 18 years, placing the district among the worst performers nationally. In 24-25, teenage pregnancies stood at 21%, reflecting the health consequences of early marriage. Out of 254 Gram Panchayats, 7 have now been declared child marriage free. Role of adolescent girls. They are named as Kanya Shri Yodhas. Girls themselves have emerged as key agents of change. You can quote this in essays as well as in ethics, also in society. Okay. See, Monija Khatun, a class 11 student, prevented 6 child marriages in 2025 by using the child helpline, including stopping the marriage of a 14-year-old classmate. The another girl, she's a class 12 student. She resisted her own forced marriage at 17 years, threatening to approach the police. Both were recognized as Kanya Shri Yodhas, a title given by the district administration to girls actively fighting child marriage. There is an institutional support, the Kanya Shri scheme. It is launched in 2013. It is a conditional cash transfer program aimed at delaying marriage and promoting education of girls. The scheme has reached nearly 1 crore beneficiaries, but Murshidabad's experience shows that cash incentives alone are insufficient without social mobilization and enforcement. There are various community driven interventions too, like multiple local institutions have been mobilized. Schools conduct monthly gender sessions educating students about child marriage and helplines. Mosques make announcements every Friday prayers, warning against child marriage. Panchayats engage families directly and warn of legal consequences when persuasion fails. And local NGOs such as Suprava Panchashila Magila Udyog Samiti supports awareness and reporting. There are various legal frameworks like under the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006, parents and facilitators can be prosecuted. Under POXO Act 2012, the husband or adult male involved can face stringent criminal charges. Now, the impact on health and social indicators. See, early marriage leads to poor maternal and child health outcomes. Anganwadi workers highlight risks such as underweight babies, pregnancy complications, and maternal mortality. After aggressive district action from mid 2025, teenage pregnancy rates fell from 21% to 17%. So the whole article says that the child marriage can be reduced through a multi-layered approach combining community participation, girls empowerment, local leadership, legal enforcement and administrative coordination. The next article is Tragedy and Farce. See, the recent US military action against Venezuela under President Donald Trump, including airstrikes and the claimed capture of President and his wife, represents a serious violation of international law. And this reflects a revival of US imperial behavior in the Western Hemisphere, and it is echoing earlier interventions that have produced instability rather than democracy. Now, first we will look into the violation of international law and sovereignty. The forced removal of a sitting head of a state violates Article 2 of the UN Charter, which upholds sovereignty and non intervention. Second, the US actions like bombing targets, attacking oil tankers, and carrying out operations without UN Security Council authorization positions Washington as a unilateral enforcer of global order, undermining the multilateral institutions like UN. The second one is revival of the Monroe Doctrine. A key motive behind the US aggression is the reassertion of American dominance in Latin America. The Trump administration's national security doctrine identifies the region as a strategic priority, effectively reviving the Monroe Doctrine. The third one is containing China and Russia. See, Venezuela has built strong economic and strategic ties with China and Russia, particularly in energy and infrastructure. China is a major buyer of Venezuelan oil and has invested heavily in the country. The US seeks to dismantle these partnerships to prevent rival powers from gaining influence in its perceived backyard. The next is the oil as a strategic driver. Now, Venezuela possesses around 17% of the world's proven oil reserves. and US demands to reclaim stolen American assets. And this long-standing objective of reopening Venezuela's oil sector to American companies. So this control over Venezuelan oil also would reduce US dependence on West Asian energy, and this will also weaken China's energy security. So this is a whole geopolitics involved. The next article is high and dry. Gig workers form a growing part of India's workforce, especially in the app-based delivery, transport and services. And recent nationwide strikes by gig workers highlight deep insecurity in wages, working conditions and social protection. Now, the first one is the limited coverage under labor codes. Under the new framework, gig workers are included only under social security provisions and not under wage protection or working conditions. The code on wages excludes gig workers from an employer-employee relationship, allowing platforms to avoid obligations related to minimum wages, fair pay, and job security. As a result, key demands related to algorithmic pay cuts and opaque incentives remain unresolved. The second one is platform centric compliance model. The occupational safety, health, and working conditions rules rely on traditional employer compliance mechanisms such as the Shram Svivida portal. This model does not address the realities of app mediated work, where algorithms control work allocation, pay, and incentives. Consequently, enforcement gaps persist. The third one is the social security rules. The draft rules mandate gig workers to register on a portal and require aggregators to upload and update worker data quarterly. Eligibility is based on a minimum of 90 days with one aggregator or 120 cumulative days across platforms in a financial year. However, this system places the burden on workers to prove eligibility and allows the government to add further conditions, increasing the uncertainty. The fourth one is the structural problems. Although one day can count multiple times if a worker works across platforms, the rules fails to protect workers who face illness, maternity, caregiving responsibilities or demand slumps. Now, workers risk losing eligibility due to circumstances beyond their control, making social security fragile rather than guaranteed. The fifth problem is the absence of benefit clarity and grievance redressal. The rules do not clearly define what benefits the Social Security Fund will provide, minimum coverage standards, or timelines for claims and appeals. Dispute resolution mechanisms remain unclear and may depend heavily on platform cooperation, and this is undermining the workers' trust. And finally, there is a need for transparency and worker rights. Platforms are not mandated to share regular, verifiable statements of job performed, hours worked, earnings, and deductions. Now, without access to these accurate data or the right to contest discrepancies, workers remain vulnerable to this manipulation. The next article for the day, security camps, the game changer in the Maoist fight. See, Maoism in India has been significantly curbed over the last decade, and government data show that Maoist related violence has reduced by nearly 90% between 2010 and 2025. The left wing extremism footprint has shrunk from 126 districts in 2018 to just 11 districts by October 2025, and only three districts in South Bastar like Bijapur, Narayanpur and Sukma, they are categorized as most affected. And a key factor behind this success has been the establishment of security camps in remote Maoist dominated areas. Now, we will look into why Dandakaranya became the Maoist stronghold. The Maoists entered the Dandakaranya region in the early 1980s due to pressure in Andhra Pradesh. The region suited insurgent operations due to dense forest, rugged terrain, and its location across multiple states such as Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Maharashtra, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh. And the reasons are administrative neglect, weak governance, marginalized tribal populations, and the policy of isolating tribal belts created a governance vacuum. And this deficit enabled Maoists to establish parallel authority, reinforced by grievances related to land, forest, and resource rights like Jal, Jungle, Zameen, and the state's focus on extractive development. Now, we will move on to the establishment of security camps, how it became a turning point. The major shift in counter Maoist strategy has been the establishment of security camps deep inside remote and previously Maoist controlled areas. Although initial resistance was witnessed, local acceptance grew as tangible benefits followed. Now, if we take the key advantages, the first one is the enhanced security presence. Now, security camps increase the police to population ratio, restricting Maoist mobility and reducing their ability to operate freely. The second is the reduced response time. Faster response to emergencies put Maoists on the defensive and improved the confidence and morale of security forces. The third is psychological impact. Visible dominance of security forces weakened Maoist influence and reassured local populations that welfare and protection lie within the state. Now, fourth one is improved intelligence. Trust built with locals improved human intelligence, directly weakening Maoist networks. The next is the infrastructure development. Road construction and mobile towers followed security deployment, transforming connectivity and local lifestyles. The next is the administrative reach. Civil administration expanded into previously inaccessible areas. Officials such as collectors, tahsildars, and patwaris now regularly interact with villagers. So, this all led to the decline of this Maoist capabilities. As state presence strengthened, Maoist recruitment, funding, weapons acquisition, and operational capacity declined. Many cadres and leaders have surrendered while others have been neutralized. And Maoism's physical presence is now confined to a few pockets and is steadily weakening. While security gains are significant, long term peace requires addressing deeper governance and rights based concerns. The tribals emerging from isolation, issues related to land, forest rights, and local self governance will become central. The implementation of constitutional guarantees under the Panchayat's Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, the Forest Rights Act, is very critical. And civil administration must rebuild governance structures from the ground up in areas that were long neglected. The next article for the day is the struggle to count women's labor. See, women's labor, especially the unpaid care, domestic, emotional, and mental work, remains largely invisible in economic measurement and policy frameworks. And as early as 1739, Mary Collier highlighted how women contribute equally to productive labor yet remain unrecognized. And this invisibly persists even today, despite global evidence showing women shoulder a disproportionate burden of unpaid work. Now, if you look at the scale of the problem, a 2023 United Nations report shows that globally, women spend 2.8 more hours per day than men on unpaid care and domestic work. And while domestic labor has entered public discourse to some extent, emotional and mental labor, such as sustaining relationships, maintaining households, and supporting emotional well being, continues to remain uncounted, unpaid, and undervalued. Now, we will look into why women's labor remains invisible. The first one is the economic and ideological bias. See, various feminist scholars say that economic systems prioritize productive labor associated with market output traditionally performed by men, while treating care work as secondary. The second one is the GDP centric growth model. The emphasis on GDP growth, physical infrastructure, and male breadwinner employment sidelines social infrastructure like child care, elder care, and mental health services, which are heavily dependent on women's labor. The next is the gendered division of labor. Now, the biological differences have been used to mask the social construction of gender roles. The separation between production men and social reproduction women has reinforced women's subordination by defining their labor as non productive. The next is the emotional labor, the most invisible form. See, beyond physical domestic work, women perform emotional and mental labor like maintaining harmony, caregiving, emotional support, and crisis management. This labor is essential for the functioning of families, communities, and economies. Yet it is not recognized in laws, budgets, or labor statistics. So when you take like global efforts, from country Bolivia, Article 338 of their constitution recognizes housework as economic activity and entitles housewives to social security. If you take Trinidad and Tobago, they have Counting Unremunerated Work Act 1996, which mandates measurement and valuation of unpaid work. In Argentina, pension credits for unpaid care work, including child rearing. Despite these steps, no country formally recognizes emotional and mental labor in economic or legal frameworks. Now, if you take Indian context, India lacks a comprehensive legal framework to recognize or compensate unpaid domestic care and emotional labor, despite it forming the backbone of households and the economy. Now, if you take the judicial intervention in Kannayan Naidu and others versus Kamsala Ammal and others, the Madras High Court ruled that a wife's household labor contributes indirectly to asset creation, entitling her to an equal share in family property. This marked an important judicial acknowledgement of unpaid labor. So, what should be the way forward? The first is the policy recognition. Unpaid care and emotional labor must be formally included in national accounting systems, budgets, and labor policies. The second one is the social infrastructure investment, like increased public spending on childcare, elder care, healthcare, and mental health services. The third is gender role transformation, redistribution of care responsibilities through greater male participation. The fourth one is legal reforms like social security, pension credits, and property rights linked to unpaid labor. See, in today's data point, you have to note that between 1990 and 2024, India incurred average annual disaster losses equivalent to 0.4% of its GDP. And India ranks second only to the Philippines among Asian economies in the World Risk Index. The index measures risk as a combination of population exposure to hazards, structural vulnerability, coping capacity, long term adaptation capacity. And India's high ranking reflects large population exposure and uneven adaptive capacity, especially in disaster prone regions. Okay, the next article, Venezuela's crisis unlikely to hit India's energy security. See, the recent US attack on Venezuela is unlikely to affect India's energy security in any significant manner. And this is primarily because India's dependence on Venezuelan crude is minimal and has steadily declined over the past few years due to US sanctions. See, according to the data given by the Ministry of Commerce, India imported only $255.3 million worth of crude oil from Venezuela in the current financial year. And this constituted only about 0.3% of India's total oil imports during this period. Now, why India's energy security is not at risk? First is the trade volumes are very low, making India largely insulated from supply disruptions. Second, existing sanctions have already constrained India-Venezuelan oil trade, meaning there is little additional shock. Third, the large geographical distance between India and Venezuela reduces the logistical dependence too. Now, if you take the Venezuela's position in global oil markets, Venezuela is a member of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is OPEC. However, its present role in global oil markets is limited. And according to the OPEC data, Venezuela accounts for about 3.5% of OPEC's oil exports and around 1% of global oil supply. And this reduced share is largely due to long-standing US sanctions and production constraints. And another important factor is the heavy nature of Venezuelan crude oil. So this type of heavy crude requires specialized refineries, which most countries, including India, do not widely possess. See, the next article is this center relaxes norms for startups to get funds from DSIR. See, in this, what they have told us, initially there was one eligibility criteria, that is 3-year existence. And now they have taken out this 3 years existence criteria. That's it. See, regarding this article, making strong efforts to host 2036 Olympics, Prime Minister Modi. See, we are bidding to host 2036 Olympic Games. And right now we are hosting the 2030 Commonwealth Games in Ahmedabad. Okay, so just know that we are going to conduct this, and this is known as a sports diplomacy, and this also showcases our soft power. So the next article for the day is unusual genetic code in Antarctic microbes yield rare amino acid. See, scientists have discovered that some Antarctic and gut microbes called archaea use a different genetic code from almost all other life on Earth. Normally, a DNA signal called a stop codon tells the cell to stop making a protein. But in these microbes, the same signal does not mean stop. Instead, it adds a rare amino acid to the protein. See, why is this unusual? In almost all organisms, DNA is read in 3-letter words called codons. There are 64 codons in total. 61 codons make amino acids and 3 codons act as stop signals. One such stop codon is tag. Now, in these archaea, tag never acts as a stop signal. it always adds the rare amino acid called pyrolysin, which is PYL. This creates a new genetic code with more protein building capacity. Term in news today is sprites. See, sprites are rare, brief flashes of light that occur high above thunderstorms, much higher than normal lightning. They appear at an altitude of about 80 kilometers in the upper atmosphere and are usually red or crimson in color. And sprites happen just after a powerful lightning strike from a thunderstorm below. Unlike regular lightning, which moves between clouds and the ground, sprites shoot upwards into the sky and last for only a fraction of a second. And they can take different shapes such as the columns, jellyfish-like forms, or branching structures. And despite being observed for several decades, scientists still do not fully understand how sprites form. Okay, from prelims perspective, just know what are sprites. This is enough. It is a mysterious upper atmospheric electrical events. The other interesting term in the paper is this wolf supermoon. First, the wolf moon is the traditional name for the full moon in January. Long before modern calendars, people used such names to mark seasons. And this name is purely cultural and it is not scientific. Okay. Now, a supermoon. A supermoon is an astronomical term. The moon orbits the earth in an elliptical path, not a perfect circle. So when the moon is closest to the earth, that is the point is called perigee, and when it is farthest, it is called apogee. If a full moon occurs near perigee, it is called a supermoon. So a wolf supermoon happens when the January full moon coincides with the moon being closest to the earth. That's all for today. Thank you all for joining.